I need to warn you before we start. This story isn't about falling in love. I mean, not the way you're thinking. This one's about a woman who spent 20 years building walls so strong, she forgot there was someone still living inside them. And the thing that finally brought those walls down, well, it wasn't a man. It was a 12-year-old girl with a cardboard suitcase and a note that said she wasn't worth keeping. I didn't go to the platform the day the Orphan train came through Dalton Springs. I want to be clear about that. I was at Mercer's General Store buying flour 20 pounds, same as every month, and if the train happened to pull in while I was counting my change, well, that was just timing, not intention. July of 1883, and Wyoming was trying to kill everything that lived on it. The heat had been building for 3 weeks straight. No rain, no wind, just that white sky pressing down like a hand on your chest. Dust coated the jars on Mercer's shelves. Dust settled in the creases of my neck. I could taste it when I swallowed, gritty and dry, like the land itself was crawling inside you to remind you who was in charge. I heard the whistle first, then the shuffling, half the town moving toward the platform like iron filings to a magnet. Orphan train days were events in Dalton Springs. Families came to look, to choose, to inspect children the way you'd inspect livestock at auction, checking teeth and temperament and willingness to work. I knew how those platforms felt. I knew it the way you know a burn scar you don't have to touch the stove again to remember. So I stayed by the window, flour sack against my hip, coins in my palm, just watching. That's all. The children came off in a line, 6 of them scrubbed faces, borrowed clothes, eyes that had learned not to expect anything. I counted them without meaning to. A habit from a different life. There were 2 boys near the front, tall enough to be useful, a pair of sisters holding hands. A small boy clutching a Bible, like it was the only thing he owned, and it probably was. And then, her. She stepped off last. 12, maybe 13, though hunger had a way of making children look like they were carved from something harder than age. Brown hair chopped short, someone had taken scissors to it without kindness or skill. A cardboard suitcase held in front of her chest like a shield. And her chin. Lord, that chin. Lifted like a fist. Like she was daring the whole world to hit her first so she could stop waiting for it. Orrin Cade was standing at the platform edge, paperwork in his hand. Hat pushed back. Good man. Orrin. Quiet. Ran a horse ranch 6 miles east of my place. He'd requested a boy 14 or 15, someone strong enough to help break yearlings. That's what the agency had promised. The agent, a thin man in a city suit who looked like he was melting in the heat, shuffled through his papers and cleared his throat. Read the note aloud, right there on the platform, where God and everyone could hear. Difficult? Doesn't follow rules? Has been placed and returned twice. My fingers went white around the flour sack. Difficult? I'd worn that word pinned to my dress in 1861, standing on a platform in Missouri, while strangers decided whether I was worth the trouble of feeding. I set the flour on the counter, walked out the back door, didn't say goodbye to Mercer, didn't look at the platform again. My homestead sat 30 acres south of town, hard land, drought-cracked. But mine? I'd filed the claim myself, built the cabin tight, dug the well deep. I had 1 chair at my table, 1 plate on the shelf, and a hearth I hadn't lit in 2 years because, well, fire is for homes with people in them. I had a house. That's different. I set my 1 plate down that evening. The second chair held a stack of mending. It had held mending so long, the seat had shaped itself to the pile. Outside, heat lightning cracked across a sky that refused to rain. I told myself I wouldn't think about the girl. I thought about nothing else. 3 days it took for the gossip to reach me, which, honestly, showed restraint for Dalton Springs. Mrs. Loomis at the post office told Mrs. Beckett at the dry goods. Who told the boy delivering my seed order? Who told me while unloading sacks from his wagon like it was just weather he was reporting? That orphan girl won't sleep inside Mr. Cade's house, won't eat at his table, won't say a single word, just sleeps in the barn with the Horaces. He shook his head, fascinated. Next eastbound train's in 2 weeks. Reckon they'll send her back. I paid him, said nothing, carried the seed inside. But the next morning, and I want to be honest here, I am not a woman who lies to others, only to herself. I saddled my horse before dawn and rode to Orphan's ranch. I told myself I was inquiring about a bay mare I'd had my eye on. That was a lie I'd been saving for the right occasion. I found the barn door open, lamplight spilling gold across the dirt. And inside the girl, Nell, though I didn't know her name yet. She was grooming the horses, all of them, moving stall to stall with a brush in each hand, working the withers, the fetlocks, the mane, in long steady strokes that said, I have done this before, and this is the only language I trust. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me standing there in the half dark. Her hands were sure on the horse's steady, knowing, gentle, everything the note said she wasn't. Orphan appeared from the house, coffee cup in hand, circles dark under his eyes. He wasn't a tall man, but he was solid, built from the same wood as his fence posts, the kind that holds even when the ground shifts. He stopped when he saw me. Miss Colvin, he nodded. You're up early? Came about the bay mare. He looked at me, looked at the barn, knew I was lying and was kind enough not to say so. She won't come inside, he said quietly, like he was confessing a failure. I leave a plate by the barn door every night. She won't touch it till I'm gone. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I don't know what to do with her, ma'am. I ain't equipped for this. I gave no useful advice. What could I say? I know exactly what she's doing, because I did it too. No, I wasn't ready for that. I rode home. But halfway there, I stopped my horse and just sat. Because I'd noticed something at Orphan's ranch, something small that lodged in me like a splinter. He'd left a blanket folded outside the barn door, not inside where the girl might feel cornered, trapped, obligated, outside, where she could choose it, or not, where the choosing was hers. That was either kindness or patience, and I didn't trust either one. I unsaddled my horse at home and saw my own hands, shaking. The girls had been so steady on those horses, and mine were trembling like I was the one sleeping in someone else's barn. I went back. Of course I went back. I told myself it was practical. The heat wave was killing stock across the valley, and my well still ran while half the counties had gone dry. I could haul water to Orphan's ranch mornings, help with the horses, a fair exchange water for, well, I hadn't figured that part out yet. The important thing was the excuse. The excuse was sturdy enough to lean on, and I needed that. Orphan accepted with a relief he tried to hide and couldn't. Much obliged. Miss Colvin. I surely am. It's just water, I said. Don't make it more than it is. He nodded. Didn't argue. That was the thing about Orphan Cade. He knew when a woman was drawing a line. and he had the sense to stand on his side of it. I set rules for myself. Mornings only. Gone by noon. I was helping horses, not people. I was not getting involved with a child who'd be on a train in 2 weeks. I was not getting involved with a quiet man whose patience made me nervous. I was watering livestock. That's all. I worked alongside the girl in silence. She knew I was there. I could feel her watching from the corners of her vision, the way a barn cat watches a new hand, assessing, measuring the distance between curiosity and danger. I didn't push, didn't talk, didn't try to coax or comfort. I knew the arithmetic of children like her: one wrong move, one too quick hand, one voice pitched too sweet, and the count resets to 0. You lose everything you didn't know you'd earned. So I just worked, filled the water troughs, brushed the mare I'd pretended to want to buy. Let the silence do what silence does. When you give it enough room, it starts to feel like company instead of absence. Third morning, I lifted the water bucket to pour into the trough, and something caught my eye. A flower. Desert marigold, small, bright yellow, tough as anything that blooms in a drought, tucked into the handle of the bucket where only I would find it. I looked around. Nell was at the far end of the barn, back turned, brushing a gelding like she hadn't moved in an hour. I stared at that flower. My throat closed around something I couldn't swallow past. I pulled the marigold out, dropped it in the dirt, walked to my horse, rode home with my jaw clenched and my hands gripping the reins too tight, and something blooming behind my ribs that I could not name and would not water. I opened my cabin door to dust and silence. The cold hearth stared back at me like it had been waiting to ask a question I wasn't ready to answer. A week passed, then another. The routine settled in around us like sediment in still water, me arriving before dawn with the water wagon, Nell already in the barn, Orphan working the corral with his yearlings, 3 people orbiting the same center without ever touching. I started noticing things I had no business noticing. I watched her spot a stone bruise on the chestnut's right fore, before Orphan saw it, before the horse even showed the limp. She'd reorganized the tack room by size. Every bridle and halter hung at the right height, without being asked, without being taught. She knew which herbs grew along the creek bed that would draw heat from a swollen hoof, plantain and comfrey, crushed between rocks. Knowledge that came from watching, from paying the kind of attention that children pay when adults aren't safe enough to ask questions of. And Orphan, well, I noticed him too, which was worse. He ate last, always, served himself after the hands were fed, after the girl's plate was set by the barn door. He'd fixed the hinge on the barn side door, the one Nell bumped every morning in the dark. Didn't mention it. I saw he'd carved a hook at her height for the hat she wore against the sun. Just put it there, like it had always been there. I watched him talk to a spooked colt one afternoon, the same voice he used near Nell, low, unhurried, his hands at his sides where they could be seen, not reaching, not demanding, just present, offering himself as something steady to lean against if and when the leaning felt safe. "You're good with nervous things," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, surprised, maybe, that I'd spoken first. I figure most things that bite do it 'cause they're scared, not 'cause they're mean. You just gotta let 'em come to the understanding you ain't gonna hurt 'em. He paused. Some understandings take longer than others. I turned back to the water trough. My chest hurt. The heat wave deepened, air thick, shimmering above the corral fence. I caught myself staying past noon without acknowledging it. Caught myself humming while I worked, stopped immediately. Nell glanced at me from across the barn. Almost a smile? Almost? That evening I rode home and walked past my cold hearth without looking at it. Set my one plate on the table. Then I stopped, stood there, staring at the second chair, the one buried under mending for 7 years. I moved the mending to the floor, left the chair empty. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I'm a practical woman. Chairs aren't symbols. They're furniture. But I left it empty. And I stood there looking at it longer than any practical woman should. I found her behind the hay bales on a Tuesday morning, shaking. Not from cold. July doesn't know cold. Not in Wyoming. The barn was warm, thick with horse breath and the sweet dust of dried alfalfa. But Nell was curled tight against the back wall, knees pulled up, fists clenched around handfuls of straw, her eyes wide open and seeing something that wasn't in the barn at all. Nightmare. The kind that follows you out of sleep and stands in the corner waiting. I knew those. I know those. Some mornings I still wake with my hands already fisted, braced for a blow that came 30 years ago and never really stopped coming. My body moved before my mind gave permission. I sat down not beside her, not across from her, 3 feet away, close enough to be felt, far enough to be safe. I didn't touch her. I didn't say it's all right because I am not a woman who lies to children. It wasn't all right. Nothing about her life had been all right. Instead, I said, well, I said the thing I'd never said out loud to any living soul. I was returned twice. 2. The barn went silent. Even the horses stopped shifting. Orphantrain, 1861, Missouri. I was talking to the wall, not the girl. That's how you confess to someone who doesn't trust faces, yet you give them your profile, your voice, and you let them decide whether to take it. First family wanted a servant. I was 8. I scrubbed floors till my knuckles bled, and they sent me back because I cried at night. The note said, difficult. I pressed for spore, swallowed against something sharp. Second family wanted silence. I was 10. I learned silence. They sent me back anyway because I looked at the husband wrong. I didn't look at him anyway at all. I just existed in their house. And that was already too much. The straw rustled. Small movement. They wrote the same word on the same kind of note and pinned it to the same kind of dress. And I rode the same kind of train to the same kind of platform where nobody was waiting. Silence. Long, long silence. Then a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. Nell. I closed my eyes. One word. Her name. Offered like a hand extended across a canyon, trembling, uncertain, and braver than anything I'd done in 20 years. A shadow in the doorway. Orphan. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. His face did something I'd never seen on a man's face before. Not pity, not shock, recognition. Like he was seeing me for the first time, and everything he saw made a kind of sense he hadn't expected. He set 2 cups of coffee on the barrel near the door, walked away without a word, gave us the barn. I wrapped my hands around the warm tin cup. Something behind my ribs unlocked, not gently, not like a door opening, like a bone resetting. That awful, necessary crack. That evening, I lit my hearth. First time in 2 years. The kindling caught slow, unsure of itself, like it had forgotten what fire was for. I told myself the nights were cooling. I told myself it was practical. The fire didn't believe me either, but it burned anyway. The letter arrived on a Friday. delivered by the same mail coach that brought seed catalogs and bad news in equal measure. Children's Aid Society, New York office, addressed to the Dalton Springs station agent, with copies to the town council. I know because Orrin read it to me at his kitchen table, his voice flat and careful the way a man's voice gets when he's holding rage with both hands and trying not to let it breathe. Nell was to be collected on the next eastbound train 8 days out. Redistributed. That was their word. Redistributed. Like she was freight that got delivered to the wrong depot. A farming family in Nebraska had requested a girl for domestic labor. Nell's failure to integrate at the current placement made her a candidate for reassignment. Failure to integrate. I wanted to tear that letter in half. I wanted to ask the man who wrote it whether he'd ever been 12 years old and terrified in a stranger's barn, and still managed to groom every horse before dawn without being asked, and if that wasn't integration, then what in God's name was? But I didn't tear the letter. I set it down on Orrin's kitchen table and pressed my palms flat on the wood until the shaking stopped. The town supported the removal. Of course they did. Mrs. Loomis, who ran the post office like a gavel and sat on the school board besides, spoke for the practical minds at the church meeting. Some children are beyond saving. The child is, well, she's not adjusting. Better to place her where expectations are more suited to her temperament. Expectations more suited to her temperament. I translated that in my head. Send her somewhere that doesn't care if she's broken, because breaking her further won't show. The heat wave chose that week to peak. Worst stretch since I'd homesteaded. The sky turned brass, heavy and close, pressing the air down till you wore it more than breathed it. Horses paced their stalls, restless with a weather that wouldn't break. The creek bed cracked like old pottery. Sweat pooled in the hollows of my collarbones and dried there, leaving salt. I was in the barn when Nell found out. Orrin hadn't meant for her to hear he'd been talking low to me by the corral fence. But she was there. She was always there, quiet as a shadow in the place where shadows gathered. I saw it happen, watched it cross her face like a door closing. Every flicker of softness we'd coaxed out over those weeks, every almost smile, every whispered word gone, shuddered. The blankness I recognized down to my marrow, because I'd perfected it at her age. The face that says I knew this would happen, so the world can't see that it's killing you. She walked to the barn, picked up a brush, started grooming the nearest horse. Mechanical, absent, hands moving through the motions of usefulness because that was all she had left. Make yourself useful, so they hesitate before sending you away. It hadn't worked for me, either. Orrin stood beside me, his jaw tight. "I'll write a letter," he said, "to the agency. Explain the situation." I stared at him. A letter. I knew what a letter did against a system that moved children like cargo. Nothing. A letter weighed nothing at all. I rode home and locked my door, let the hearth go cold, sat in the dark with my hands in my lap, and every argument I'd built in 20 years of surviving lined up like fence posts in my mind. Straight and strong and meant to keep things out. Not your child. Post 1, not your fight. Post 2, you survive by not claiming anyone, and nobody claiming you. Post 3, 4, 5, the whole fence. Solid, familiar, the structure I'd built my life around. If I went to the town meeting, if I stood up and spoke, they'd ask questions. They'd want to know why I cared so much about a girl who'd been in town 6 weeks. And I'd have to tell them. I'd have to say the words I'd said to Nell in the barn, but this time to the whole town, the post office women, the council members, The ranchers' wives who knew me only as that quiet woman on the South Acreage, who didn't need anyone and didn't want anything. They'd learn I was an orphan-train child. They'd see me different. Not the capable, independent Miss Colvin, who homesteaded alone. The girl who was returned. Twice. Difficult. I'd spent 22 years outrunning that word. Standing up in that meeting room would be the same as letting it catch me. I paced, kitchen to door to kitchen. The cabin felt small, Lord. It had always been small, but I'd called that efficient instead of lonely, and the lie had held for 7 years. I sat down, stood up, opened the door for air and a flower. Desert marigold, bright yellow against the dark wood of the porch railing, still warm, not from sun. The sun was long gone, warm from a small hand that had carried it 3 miles in the dark. Nell, she'd walked here, alone, at night, across open country, not to knock, not to ask, not to beg. That girl had never begged anyone for anything in her life, and I understood that refusal so deeply it made my teeth ache. The way you tidy a room before you leave a house that was never yours. The way you leave something pretty behind, so at least one person remembers you were there. I sank down on the porch boards, held the flower in both hands, and something I'd kept locked for so long I'd forgotten the shape of it. Broke open. Not tears. Something under tears. The recognition sharp, clear, undeniable that I was watching my own story happen again. Same train, same word pinned to address. Same system that moved children like parcels and called it charity. And this time, I was the adult standing on the platform. I was the one who could change the ending. I thought about my fence posts, my arguments. You survive by not claiming anyone. True. I had survived. I had 30 acres and a tight cabin and 1 plate and a cold hearth, and I had survived. But Nell was learning the same lesson right now. Tonight. And I could finally see what that lesson actually was. It wasn't strength. It was just hiding that had learned to stand up straight. I went inside, lit the hearth, pressed my good dress with the iron I kept for nothing because I never went anywhere worth pressing a dress for. I didn't sleep. Come dawn, I was walking toward town with the marigold pinned to my collar, and my hands shaking, and my spine straight, and every fence post I'd ever driven burning behind me like kindling. Town hall, late afternoon. The room was packed in hot bodies and temper and that brass-colored air pressing through the windows. The council sat at the front table, Mayor Garrity, Mrs. Loomis, Doc Aldridge, and 2 ranchers I'd never exchanged more than weather with. The children's aid agent sat to the side, Nell's file open on his lap. Nell was not present. Orrin had kept her at the ranch. Bless him for that. No child should have to sit in a room and listen to adults debate whether she's worth keeping. I walked in alone. 7 years I'd lived outside this town and never once attended a meeting, a dance, a church supper. People noticed. Heads turned. Mrs. Loomis's eyebrows rose and stayed there. I sat in the back, listened. The council's case was efficient and bloodless. The placement was an error. A boy had been requested. A girl had been sent. The child had failed to adjust. Resources were being misallocated. The next eastbound train would correct the mistake. The agent nodded along. Pen ready for signatures, Mrs. Loomis added. Without looking up from her knitting, it's nobody's fault. Some children simply don't take root. I stood up. I didn't raise my hand, didn't wait to be recognized. I just spoke. I stood. And the room went quiet, the way a room does when something unexpected happens, and people haven't decided yet whether to be curious or afraid. My name is Cora Colvin, I said. My voice was even. My hands clasped in front of me were not. Most of you know me as the woman on the South 30 who doesn't come to town much. That's true. I don't. I took a breath. The kind you take before you jump from a high place into water you can't see the bottom of. I came to Wyoming on an orphan train. In 1861, I was 8 years old. The silence changed, tightened. I was placed with a family in Missouri who wanted a servant. I scrubbed their floors until my knuckles split open, and they sent me back because I cried at night. The note pinned to my dress said difficult. I paused, let the word sit in the room like a stone dropped in still water. I was placed again, a family that wanted a quiet child. I learned quiet. They returned me anyway. Same note, same word, difficult. I looked at the agent. He'd stopped writing. I know what that word means when you're 12 and you've been sent back twice. It means you feel everything, and there's no one to feel it with. It means you've learned that love gets taken, so you stop reaching for it. It means you make yourself useful. You brush every horse. You scrub every floor because being useful is the only thing between you and the next train. My voice didn't break. I wouldn't let it. This wasn't the time for breaking. This was the time for building. That girl isn't broken. She isn't difficult. She's tired of being sent back. I swallowed. I know because I've been tired for 22 years. And I am standing here telling you this, telling you everything I have spent my whole life hiding, because every child ought to have someone who chooses to stay. I looked at the council, one by one. I'm asking for temporary guardianship. I'll sign the papers today. My homestead, my name, my signature. I'm not asking anyone to fund it or support it. I'm asking you to let a child stay where someone has finally chosen her. The room held its breath. Then boot steps. Orrin, rising from the back row where he'd been sitting so quiet, I hadn't seen him come in. I'll stand with her, he said. 3 words. That was Orrin every word a fence post, driven deep. I'll share responsibility, whatever the law requires. Not leading, not rescuing, standing beside. The silence stretched. Mrs. Loomis's knitting needles had stopped for the first time in living memory. Then a sound, soft at first, rain on the tin roof. The first rain in 3 weeks, breaking the heat wave with the gentle patience of something that had been waiting for permission. Mayor Garrity cleared his throat, called a vote. I didn't hear the count. I heard the rain steady, generous, soaking into ground that had forgotten what water tasted like. First frost came early that year, mid-October, painting the grass silver and turning the cottonwoods along the creek to gold. I remember standing on my porch that morning, our porch, I should say, though the words still felt new in my mouth, like a language I was relearning and watching my breath cloud the air and thinking, well, not thinking, really, just being still, which was new for me too. The cabin had changed. You could see it from the path, a second window cut into the east wall, so the morning light reached the corner where Nell's cot sat, piled with quilts she'd helped sew. Her stitches were crooked at first. They were getting straighter, like her spine, like mine. 2 chairs at the table now, 3 plates on the shelf, boots by the door in 2 sizes mine, worn and practical. and a smaller pair Orrin had traded a yearling for in town. Nell wore through boot leather faster than any child I'd ever seen, always moving, always in the barn or the creek bed or the ridge above the south pasture where she went to watch the hawks. She still went to the barn before dawn. Some habits are the bones of a person. You don't try to remove them. You just build the rest of the body around them. But she came back now, came back for breakfast, came back for coffee that was mostly milk and sugar, came back to sit at the table where I'd eaten alone for 7 years and never once had the courage to call it what it was. Orrin's ranch and my homestead had blurred their borders over the autumn. A path worn between the two properties by boot prints and intention his heavy tread. My purposeful one, and Nell's quick, light steps that veered off trail to check on things only she noticed. Shared fences mended on shared afternoons. Meals that happened at one house or the other without planning. Just gravity. He brought me a rocking chair last week. Set it on the porch without ceremony. Figured you might want somewhere to sit that ain't a saddle, he said. And the corner of his mouth did that thing. It did not quite a smile, but the honest possibility of one. I hadn't sat in it yet, but I would. I was learning that some things don't need to be rushed. Some things just need to be allowed. Nell wasn't fixed. I want to be clear about that. 2, she was growing, slowly, in her own way, at her own speed, still quieter than most children, still more comfortable with horses than people, still some nights. I heard her breathing go fast and shallow in the dark, and I'd light the lamp and sit at the table and wait until it steadied, because she knew I was there, and sometimes that was enough. But she hummed now, in the kitchen, while she dried the dishes, a tuneless, wandering sound that filled the cabin, the way warmth fills a room you forgot was cold. She braided my hair on Sunday mornings, her fingers quick and unsentimental, and I sat still and let her, and neither of us called it what it was. She called Orrin by his name now, not sir, not silence. Orrin. The first time she said it, he turned away fast and studied the horizon like it owed him money, and I pretended not to see his jaw working. The desert marigold, the one she'd carried 3 miles in the dark, the one I'd pinned to my collar like a declaration of war, sat in a cracked teacup on the windowsill. I'd rooted it in water, then soil. It grew, small, stubborn, leaning toward the light with the determination of something that had survived the worst the drought could throw, and decided to bloom anyway. I watched Nell set 3 plates on the table one morning without being asked. Just counted the people, counted the plates, made it match. Simple, the simplest thing in the world, and the most extraordinary. The hearth burned low and steady. October rain tapped the window, soft rain. Nothing like the desperate summer storms. The fire I'd relit the night I chose to stay had not gone cold since. I fed it every morning first thing, before coffee, before boots. A habit now, a practice, a kind of prayer for a woman who'd forgotten how to pray and remembered how to tend. I'd given up my walls to keep that girl, given up 22 years of careful, cultivated solitude, the armor I wore so long it had become my skin. I'd stood in a room full of strangers and said the word difficult, and let them see the girl I used to be. And it cost me every fence post I'd ever driven. But the girl was humming in the barn, and the man was walking up the path, and the fire was burning in a hearth that hadn't gone cold since the night I decided to stay. 3 sets of footsteps on a wooden porch, coffee and wood smoke and rain, and a cracked teacup on the windowsill where something stubborn had taken root and was learning, slowly, to bloom. I'll be honest with you, this one stayed with me. I kept thinking about Cora long after I finished telling her story, about how the bravest thing she ever did wasn't building that homestead alone or surviving all those winters. It was standing up in that room and letting people see her. Sometimes that's the hardest thing there is,